Hey, so Nancy, I'm reading your bio. It says author, speaker, executive leadership coach, licensed professional counselor, and certified sex therapist. Helping people grow into their full potential, empowering them to be truly alive. You do a lot of stuff. And we have dinner together as friends.
I know.
Judy and Ron, but that's a lot of stuff there. I'm looking at your website and it's pretty amazing. And not only that, when I look up Nancy Houston, like you're the Nancy Houston.
I am? Oh,
yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you didn't know that on Google?
There's probably
You're
500 of us. Who knows?
Well, there probably is like thousands. But if you look up Google, you are the Nancy Houston. So as we discuss these things, is there anything off limits?
No.
Anything?
Never.
Because I've watched your podcast and it seems like there's nothing off limits.
Off limits.
And then reading the book, Then God Made a Woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
nothing off limits.
It's a good thing it didn't come with like diagrams or something.
I know. No pictures. Sorry.
Because that would have been, but they wouldn't be able to actually print it in the Middle East. That's for sure. But this is amazing book. This Love and Sex is the first book you wrote.
Yes, it is.
And so that was awesome. I always refer to it as a book on sex and love.
Exactly. I know. You do. You're so funny that way. But I've had several men say it's Nancy's book on sex and love.
Yeah.
I'm like, actually it's love and sex, but either one works.
Right. So when we have gotten together and talked about things and we have a great time, a lot of fun, laughs. Mm-hmm. You and Ron, when Judy had cancer a few years ago, one of the most remarkable times. I wasn't going to do all that. I didn't even know. It wasn't even in my notes, but I just want to say publicly, thank you for you and Ron came over and Ron had a prophetic word over Judy.
He totally
did.
It was so
and
precious.
Philip and Carrie.
Yeah.
And you guys came over and prayed over Judy, I think the night before her surgery.
Yeah, we did.
Which we had a miracle in that.
Totally.
So you guys have been dear friends for about a decade now, it seems like.
At least.
Right, something like that.
Carrie introduced me to Judy.
Yeah.
And had me speak at one of her women's events, and we've been friends ever since.
And then I'm looking on your website and it has a thing about speaking. And the first photo is you speaking at our Lions Roar conference.
Oh my gosh. That's
so here's you speaking and the whole background's all these men.
Oh my gosh. That's great. I love it, Paul.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I always, when I tell people about our friendship, Ron and Nancy, and Judy and I will talk often about you guys, because you've had a great impact on our lives, both of you. But particularly your materials and what you've done and been a blessing to our family.
Thank you.
And my son Bryce.
Thank you.
But I always say, Nancy's our sex therapist. And Judy goes, no, she's not. Go, well, I don't know. I've been reading the book.
And you've read my book.
That's helped.
And we just, talk nonsense around the dinner table. But other than that.
Yeah, but there's that layer, right? That layer of things that, and that we speak about. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing, we prayed just before we started this. And I prayed it's like beauty out of ashes.
Man.
So tell me, what does the phrase, not in the head, mean? And where did that come from?
Not in the head.
Yeah, because you shared that with us in dinner.
Oh, do you mean
one time?
The story?
Yeah, your mom.
Oh,
yelling out.
Yes. Yeah. So, my dad was a World War II vet, and he was on 3 ships that sank.
Wow.
And he was I know on one of them he was one of 13 survivors. And he would say, Nancy, you'd think all the guys in the Navy would know how to swim, but they didn't. And so one of his stories was that the ship sank and some of them were able to swim to shore, but only 13 of them made it up the cliffs because the rest were beaten to death by the power of the ocean. And so my dad had a lot of trauma. He ran away from home at 15, so he had trauma from the house he was raised in, the home. Yeah. And then he had trauma from the war. And then when he got out of the military, before he became an attorney, he went back to riding bulls in the rodeo.
Wow.
busted open his head and was in the hospital for 4 months with a brain injury.
Wow.
So, later on in life when I became a therapist, I'm like learning all about brain trauma and head injuries. And I'm like, oh, now I understand my dad.
Yeah.
Because he always seemed just like a wild man to me. Like he could be violent and full of rage and anger at the drop of a hat. He could also be brilliant and amazing and funny and fun and witty and delightful. And so I loved him, and he terrorized me and my siblings. I never saw him lay a hand on my mother. It wasn't, this is so funny, Paul. I always thought domestic violence was like a husband beating up his wife, or a wife beating up her husband. But I'm like, oh, I grew up in tons of domestic violence. It was just dad towards the kids.
Yeah.
And then mom was just very neglectful and didn't have the courage to protect us. And so the one time she did was dad had gotten mad because I was playing the piano, which was a confusing message because I was supposed to practice.
Yeah.
But then when I practiced, if it disrupted him, and I think probably because he had a lot of hangovers, didn't like the noise. And so he kicked me and punched me, and I fell on the floor. And my mom, the only time she ever said anything was in that day in the kitchen. She said, Bill, don't kick her in the head.
Wow.
And I thought, yeah, because that wouldn't look good. If you kick me in the head, I'm probably going to have a broken nose and brain damage.
I've never forgotten that. And I think about you and Ron, and you speak into people's lives. Both of you do. Ron's in construction.
Yeah.
And a brilliant builder in the Dallas Metroplex area.
Yeah.
And working with one of your sons and in that business. And then here you are doing the therapy work that you're doing. And he went through some rough things.
Absolutely.
And I think about it, it's amazing to me. It seems like I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were talking about their daughter, and she'd gone through some really traumatic things. I said, what's she doing now? He said, well, she's in college. And I said, well, she's probably taking psychology. He said, how'd you know?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
it seems like that seems to be the path. It's like trying to figure out what happened to you, right?
Yeah.
When did that penny drop?
Well, for me, I'll never forget it, Paul. We have 4 sons, and when our youngest son started first grade, I think I finally had a little bit of space. And one Saturday, it was pouring down rain because usually we were at sporting events, all day Saturdays.
With 4 sons, yeah.
But this day we weren't because it was raining, and I cried all day.
Wow.
I cried all day, and I couldn't stop. And Ron was out cleaning up the garage, and I went out and would say, hey, are you okay, honey? And he'd say, yeah, I'm great. I'm so happy. I'm getting to clean up this messy garage, which nothing makes him happier. And I'm like, but there's got to be something wrong with you, because my thought was there can't be something wrong with me. But I was 33 years old, and it's like I had held down my childhood for as long as I possibly could. And it was like that was the day it was going to start coming out of me.
Wow.
Because when we got married at 18, so, we got married right out of high school. He had had a lot of neglect.
Well, your marriage in some ways, maybe it was survival.
Oh,
right?
I think God spared us both by giving us each other.
Yes.
And creating a home where we were both safe. Because Ron had a very abusive older brother who's a Golden Gloves boxer who would beat up on Ron all the time. And his mom ran a daycare of 25 kids Monday through Friday. He had 6 siblings, and they had foster kids.
Well, and there was a lot of blended family stuff going on.
Well, there was just a lot of neglect and abuse that was overlooked.
Didn't he live in a tent in the back?
When I met Ron in high school, his parents had sold their house in town and moved out to a farm, and they were going to build a house. But in the meantime, he was living in a tent. And I'm like, oh, well, and then they built a barn. And sometimes when he's like not having the best manners, like, dude, were you born in a barn? I mean,
yes.
Like,
did you grow up in a barn?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Like, we raised in a barn, and that'll be our joke.
And lived in a tent.
Right.
During high school.
I know. for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, difficult. Those are, and all the, as you mentioned, neglect. Yeah. So neglect is actually a form of abuse.
It's a horrible form of abuse, and it's usually the most unidentifiable.
Really?
Yes, because if like dad's punching you in the nose, you're being punched.
Okay.
And if there's sexual trauma, you can identify those things. But neglect, there aren't really words for neglect. It's just something that's happening inside of you. It's something that's happening to you emotionally and psychologically. And so there aren't really words to say.
So it's like a hidden little virus in you that's kind of eating you from the inside out.
And most of our abuse, I think all of our abuse happens when we're pre-verbal. Now, I don't mean we don't know how to say words, but we don't have the language until we're adults to describe what was happening in our childhood.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's not until we're adults that we go, you know what, that wasn't normal.
Yeah, that's not right.
Like, somebody should have been protecting me.
I've talked to so many guys who will say, I didn't realize I wasn't in a normal home.
Right.
Until later.
Yeah.
When I had some friends.
Yeah.
I had a guy just tell me that the other day.
Absolutely.
He said, I didn't know what was happening in my house was different.
Yeah.
Until I was 15, I went over to a friend's house and stayed overnight, and it was so different.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And then again, most of us don't have language for it. Like for me,
he didn't know how to describe it.
I was 33 and like, you mean none of this is okay?
Wow.
Because when I got married at 18, I'm like, okay, this is my before life. This is my new life.
Mm-hmm.
This life is over. I wanted to just divide myself. And I think when I got
So you pushed it down.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And whenever I'd have what I would call bad feelings towards my dad, I'd become a Christian. So I would just say, I forgive, I forgive, I forgive.
Right.
And then later on in life, I realized like, oh, all through my 20s, I practiced fake forgiveness.
What does that mean? What does that mean? So, because we are supposed to forgive, and it is something we talk a lot about with Christian Men's Network.
But I think we miss it, Paul. I think we miss what comes before forgiveness, and it's deep and profound grief. When we look at what Jesus did before he went to the cross and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Yeah.
First, he went to the garden and he grieved so deeply.
Yeah.
So profoundly that the disciples couldn't even handle it. They slept because grief is very tiring, and they couldn't even handle it. So they just fell into a coma. And Jesus is grieving so deeply and profoundly that it's coming out of his body.
Yeah.
And
he came back 3 times to them. Third time is when Judas showed up.
Right.
Fascinating.
So I wanted to avoid the grief part of my story.
I think we do. I think as men, because we compartmentalize, and we can talk about a little bit about that. It's however you want to describe that. Different drawers, compartments. All of that. We do compartmentalize, and we tend to do that more than women. There was a book. What was that? What was that book about? Women are like spaghetti, men are like waffles. Yeah. And I think it's a great description. I always remember that because everything seems to be connected.
Well, I think we all find our ways to disassociate.
So, but we all do that.
Women, we all figure out when you're raised in environments that are not healthy or helpful, we all learn the skills of disassociation.
Wow.
It's a survival technique.
Yeah.
And it's what I call what the adaptive child does for us. The adaptive child is that part of us that figured out brilliant ways to survive. And so some of that is disassociation, and it's brilliant in childhood. But what's adaptive in childhood can become maladaptive in adulthood.
Wow. So because, as a, having been when I studied a lot of history and I read a lot of first personal accounts, and that disassociation is what men do during torture, men or women. Yeah. And they're being tortured, and they somewhat disassociate what's happening to their body from who they are. Yeah. And for instance, James Stockdale, the Stockdale paradox, in which they asked him, they said, "Were you optimistic about getting out of the Hanoi Hilton, about the torture in North Vietnam?" Yeah. He said, "No." He said, "But I had faith." He said, "The optimists died because they kept thinking this will get better, this will get better, this will get better." It never did.
No.
So in a sense, what he did is he disconnected. He said, my faith is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening to my body right now, being hung, being whipped, being, fingernails pulled out by pliers, all of those things, that's not me. Mm-mm. And so if you will, emotionally, we do the same thing right here, at a local high school or in a family or wherever it may be. Yeah. And we disassociate. And then we become a Christian, follower of Christ, and we just forgive everybody. Mm-hmm. But you're saying there's a stage between that we haven't gone through. And so that's why that thing keeps coming back up.
I actually, after I'd practiced my dozen years of what I call my fake forgiveness, and it wasn't working. Yeah. And I finally just sat down with God and said, hey, listen, God, this isn't working. So teach me how to, I'd like to genuinely forgive my dad. I really would. But all this stuff just keeps popping up. Yeah. So, I went through years of therapy and started getting it all up and out. But I was an internalizer. Like, I blamed myself for so much of anything that went wrong. I blamed myself.
It was
for.
You. Yeah. You were at fault.
I must have been a bad girl, or Dad wouldn't get angry. Yeah. Or if I do this, he wouldn't lose it. Or if, And so I was such an internalizer. And I could get in touch with my sadness, but I could not get in touch with my anger, because I made a vow as a kid. My dad was a rageaholic. So I'm like, I will never be angry. I will never rage. And so I didn't know how to get in touch with my anger. So I felt like God said to me, Nancy, I want you to hate everything your dad did to you. I want you to hate it. And I remember saying to God, well, that doesn't sound very nice or Christian.
That doesn't sound very Christian.
It doesn't sound very Christian. Yeah. But, I think, well, it's totally biblical, though. God says,
God hates evil.
Hate evil. And what my dad had done was evil. Sexual trauma from your own father is evil. Yeah. It's just pure from the pit of hell, right? And so is violence towards your own children. It's evil. And so I'm like, so I got in touch with my anger and even my hatred during those 6 months.
So now, okay, we're going to come back to some other things. I'm going to come back to some of this. You went through years of therapy. Yeah. You'd already been going through therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you studying therapy? Were you going to college? What was happening during this stage? You guys got married at 18.
I got through a lot of my own process before I actually went back to school to become a therapist.
Oh, okay.
It really wasn't my goal. I just, but the Lord does love to take the most broken parts of our lives and turn them into something for His glory and goodness. Yeah. Like, He loves to take our horrible stories and turn them into His story. Yeah. And so...
and it becomes something healing for someone else.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, in Alcoholics Anonymous, the last step is now turn around, give it to somebody else. Yeah. And so that's basically what happened in my life. Like, He did so much healing and redemption. Wow. So I get to the end of the 6 months, and I'm like, well, God... I think maybe, who knows, but I think I have most of it up and out now.
This is what started on that Saturday.
Yeah, no.
Or that day you
really,
were crying.
I had to spend years just letting my sadness up and out, Paul.
Okay.
Like, the first day I went to therapy, well, so then that was a Saturday. The next day at church, I walked up beside, there's a man on our staff who is a therapist. And I said, hey, Brock, I think something's wrong with me. I didn't know what. Yeah. I had no clue what was wrong with me, Paul, because I was so disassociated from my own story. Yeah. And so he said, well, come to me tomorrow at 1. So at about 12:50, I'm sitting in his waiting room, and I'm thinking, I'm fine. I'm great.
And why am I here?
Well, I don't need to be here.
With all these people.
I should go. It was a bad day. And now everything's going to be just fine. Because that's how I was taught to cope. My family, we belonged to all the country clubs. My dad was the city attorney, the city judge. He, they were, I don't know. My friend said, your mom and dad were the jet setters of our community, right? I think that's an exaggeration. But anyway, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I was taught by my mother, you make everything look good. And you better be just...
Well, it's all about appearances.
You better be fine. And so for me to let myself kind of like fall apart was completely unacceptable. Yeah. So anyway, I got into his office about the time I was thinking about running, and he got me, and we sat down. He said, well, tell me your story. And so I just told him really matter-of-factly, not a tear, no feelings, no nothing. The man has the nerve to sit there and cry.
Really?
He is just bawling over my story
Wow.
that I feel nothing for.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. I go, I'm fine. Like, then I try to console him, like, I'm fine.
I'm going to be okay.
I survived.
Your
It's not that
therapist
big
is
of a
losing
deal.
it.
And his tears are like saying, girl, you are not fine. And then he said, Nancy, you have PTSD so bad.
Wow.
Which now we'd call complex trauma.
Okay.
You know, and there's a difference, you know. And my dad had complex trauma. And so that then he traumatized me with his complex trauma. And so then it just becomes intergenerational, you know. And he didn't.
And so, okay, well, this is really fascinating because really this would have been passed down.
Oh, totally. Totally.
You know, if you hadn't found, first of all, this faith in Christ, I want to come back to how that happened, and then found somebody who was a therapist who not only had empathy, but they have the anointing and power of the Holy Spirit to be able to speak life into you. That isn't just a go do these three things.
Absolutely. I mean, thank God he didn't. And for me to receive that kind of empathy from a male was probably just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was possible. Right?
Wow.
Because my grandfather was so shut down. My dad's dad was so shut down. He must have been a terribly traumatized man. My father's mother's mother died giving birth to her little sister. So my grandmother at 18 months old was put into foster care because her daddy did not want her. Wow. He was still alive.
Yeah.
But he was a womanizer, is what I've been told. This story I've been told. He was a womanizer and did not want these two little girls. So he put them in foster care in the same town where they would see him.
Wow.
And Daddy didn't want them.
Wow.
And so you can imagine the trauma my grandmother had. So my grandparents have trauma. My dad has trauma. He passes it on to me. And I get to decide, okay, I don't treat my sons the way I was treated. And I had received Christ, and I could love my sons. And I also had a lot of my own trauma. And until they say that if you want to be a great parent, you've got to put together your own story, or else you'll pass it on, even if you don't mean to.
Right. Wow.
And so,
So how did you found Christ? How did that happen?
So, well, it's funny, you know, way back when, Paul, they didn't have public school kindergartens, and my mother wanted me to go to kindergarten. And the only kindergarten in town, which was the best kindergarten in town, I guess.
Well, apparently you would only have the best.
Apparently. I don't know. It's such an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But was a kindergarten at First Assembly of God.
Really?
And so I went to this kindergarten. And the first day, there are 2 classes of kindergartners.
Yeah.
And the first day, they put me in with a man teacher. And the next day, I was in with a woman teacher. And I came home and I said, Mom, today I had a different teacher. And Mom says, you don't remember yesterday? And I said, no, what happened? And she said, well, you absolutely melted down and said you could not have a man teacher.
Wow.
I was so terrified of men.
Really?
And so I had this huge meltdown. But apparently the school, maybe they were the first ones to ever hear me and listen to me and take me out of that class and put me in the class with a woman.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, that must have really...
Yeah.
I must have felt heard. I must have felt safe. And it must have been a place where I could give a cry for help.
My goodness.
I know it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, you know, when you're 5, you don't know all these things. But I'm sure that I received Christ in that little school.
Yeah.
You know.
You did.
And so I remember just praying like, God, if you're alive, I want to know you. Wow. Because, when you're in a non-Christian home and you're living in hell, and even though I imagine I invited Christ into my life at 5, but there's nothing to feed that, right?
Yeah.
And so I would pray, God, if you're alive, I don't know if you are, but if you are, I want to know you. And that was kind of my constant prayer.
Wow.
And I think they'd given me a little Bible, and I would hide under my covers. I'm going to cry, huh?
Yeah.
I would hide under my covers with a flashlight and read my Bible.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, because Dad would say religion is a crutch, and we don't need it. We are self-made people, and we do not need God. Do kids get this?
Wow. I have I've never heard that story.
Yeah.
I think about our friend Karen who went through such abuse, and her safe place was every afternoon after school, rather than go home. Mm-hmm. She would go to this little chapel, and it was open, and they would let her sit in there. And she would go to this little chapel, and she would just sit there. And she learned some of the songs from that little church. And she would sit there, and it was her safe place for a couple hours before she had to go home.
Wow.
And she did that every day for years.
Wow.
But I've never, and it's always just marked me.
Yeah.
That was Karen's journey. But I didn't know that you would, you had a little Bible somebody gave you. And you would sit there with a flashlight under your covers and read this little Bible. Man.
And I didn't know if it was mythology, because my mom would love to read us kids Greek mythology at night.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if it was real or if they were just like stories.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but you felt different about it.
I did.
There was something. It was the Holy Spirit.
It was totally
God was
the Holy
speaking
Spirit.
to you.
And then when I was 14 years old, my parents went to Europe for a month, which is amazing to have them out of the house.
A month off.
It truly was.
Yeah.
Because I could never sleep in the household I was raised in. And so if Dad was out of the house, then I could, maybe relax a little bit and sleep. But my sister disobeyed the rules and went to church with our Baptist neighbors and came home and said, Nancy, I received Christ. And I said, well, how'd you do that? I've been wanting to do that forever.
Yeah.
And so oddly enough, we went up into my parents' bedroom, which had blue shag carpet. And I cried a bucket of tears because I hated them so bad. And just cried and received Christ. And so my sister, who just received Christ, led me to the Lord. And then, and then there was a youth pastor who lived across from the junior high. And I heard that he had a Bible study, so I would sneak over after school and go to Bible studies.
Yeah. See, this is the opposite of my upbringing.
Really?
Because I grew up in church, right?
Oh, yeah, you did.
So we didn't sneak over to go to a Bible study. We snuck out of Bible studies in order to go do bad stuff.
There you go. Well, of course
so,
you did. Why not,
it's
right?
Hey, you're sneaking into a Bible study.
I'm sneaking it because Dad would scream at my sister and I and say, I will not have Jesus freaks for daughters.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
And so then one day my sister witnessed to my dad for 5 hours.
Wow.
And really, if you could have steam coming out of the top of your head or fire, he did. Veins popping, face beat red, cursing, furious. I thought she was crazy to talk to him for that long a time about the Lord, but she did. And eventually he accepted Christ. And then eventually my mom did.
Wow. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
How did now you met Ron in high school.
Yeah.
You guys, and for people who haven't met your husband, he's a man's man. He's a construction guy, motorcycle rider, 4 sons, all outdoorsmen, doing stuff, and growing up in Oregon, outdoor sort of things. So where did Ron come to be a follower of Christ?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that I just. When my dad became a Christian, I think what happened to him really was he traded all of his addictive behavior for religious addiction.
Yeah.
And so then he started preaching at us nonstop.
Yeah. Same with Judy's father
Dad,
did the same thing.
And became very rigid. I mean, before that, like, I could do whatever I wanted to do pretty much, right?
Yeah.
I got to make all my own choices. And but then when he became a Christian, he got really rigid, really legalistic. Wow. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, and he's preaching at us, and I said, "Listen, God, I love you, but seriously, I think I'm going to have to rebel." Because teens
I am out of here.
Teens have to find a way to differentiate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
It's healthy.
Yeah, of course it is.
And so I'm like, God, I love you, but man, I can't do all this preaching. And so that's when Ron and I met. We were kind of wild childs together, truthfully. But he did accept Christ like a couple months before we got married.
Really?
Yeah, he did. He did. And, like, we got married. And
did he go to youth group with you or what? What was that?
No, we just started talking about Christ.
Really?
Because I really did love the Lord. I just didn't love all the preaching at me and all the rigidity.
Yeah.
No teenager loves that.
No.
And so, so he just accepted Christ one time when we were talking. My sister had been talking to him about the Lord. And, it was really sweet. And, like, when we got married, one of his buddies handed him a joint. And I didn't know that he smoked as much pot as he did back then.
Yeah.
He didn't do that in front of me.
You just thought he was mellow and always had the munchies?
My mom would always say, "Why, Ronnie's such a nice boy, but why does he have such red eyes?"
Yeah, and why is he always hungry?
Right? And so we got in the car. And,
every time we have popcorn, he eats
right, and we're driving down the road to leave town, and he pulls out this joint, and he's going to light it. And I said, "Hey, honey." I probably didn't call him honey at 18. I said, "Hey, it's either me or that. And if you choose that, I'm getting out of the car." And we're done.
Wow.
Because I'm like, I'm not.
Wow.
I'm not going to be married to an addict because I'd grown up with one.
Yeah.
And it's hell.
And you knew that's where that was headed.
Yep.
It always does.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. But I am not doing addiction.
Yeah.
So he threw it out the window.
He threw it out.
window.
That was that.
That was that.
Yeah, way to go, Ron.
I know. Way to go.
Give him some props on that one.
Ooh, because, man, I don't know.
Okay, so now fast forward. And by the way, if you're just listening and not seeing this video, but talking with Nancy Houston. And if you look up Nancy Houston like the city, there's all kinds of stuff about who you are, speaking engagements, life coaching. You've got an awesome podcast. What's the name of the podcast?
It's called The In-Between with Nancy Houston.
The In-Between with Nancy Houston.
Yeah.
But if we look up Nancy Houston, the podcast will come up too.
Hopefully, who knows?
Yeah.
We're working.
No, there's all kinds of stuff.
Is there? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I never look. We're working on a new website and stuff.
See, one of your sons, who's working with you on this stuff? One of your sons is working.
So
with you, right?
two of my sons are now working with me. Yeah, Jonathan is kind of like the CEO of this new company we're forming.
Wow.
And Micah is an executive coach. So we've been working together for years.
Yeah. Now Micah lives in Oregon.
Yeah.
Jonathan's here.
Yeah.
The Dallas area. And isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
All of this happening
We're
like that.
launching Better Lives Coaching because really we feel like our call is to help people live better lives.
Really?
Yep.
Better Lives Coaching.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to find out by going to Nancy Houston, nancyhouston.net.
Yeah.
I think is your website.
Yeah.
And then you've written 2 books, got more on the way.
Yeah. And this first book, Love and Sex, is really, honestly, we need to retitle it and re-release it because it's really a book on sexual trauma.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So when it first came out, it was like, hey, let's not push this too much.
Right.
Let's kind of be safer.
Yeah.
And maybe the publisher had something to do with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. With the church you were working with at the time. Yeah. And then when God made a woman, this booklet, you just let it all out. You're like, all right, we'll just talk about everything, which is what you do on your podcast.
That's what I do.
Because, Judy will have the podcast on, and I'll be like, what was that? What was it? What did they just talk about?
What did they just say?
What was has there been ever a guest where you went, did we just talk about that? Have you ever had that moment?
I really don't, because I think we Christians can avoid having open, honest conversations, and I don't think it helps anybody.
Yeah.
I think we need to have really open conversations about sexuality, about how is our psychology, what traumas do we have. Let's just face it.
Yeah.
Because that's when we find health, right?
Yeah, true. All right. So this one, and I don't know if I turned down this page or if my wife did, but it's page 49, chapter 8, sex is God's idea.
Yeah.
And I went, so maybe I flipped that down and then gave it to Judy. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
But, now we're healthy. But the thing is that these are things that quite often we don't talk about.
Well, and you know why we
Song
don't?
of Songs is a good one.
Yeah.
I've always taken Song of Songs and underlined pomegranates.
Right.
Things like that.
All the hidden lingo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We would always do that, especially when we were younger.
Yeah.
But this really is Song of Songs. Yeah. And of course, we know spiritually it's the bride and, the bridegroom, Christ.
Yeah.
But we also know that he made us human.
Yeah.
And we have these drives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But they're God-given drives.
Totally.
It's just that we humanize them and make them something we don't talk about in the church. Yeah. So then, as a young guy, we turn to friends in the street or whoever, or porn,
right.
In this day and age in particular, to find out what that is. And then pornography gives us this fake image of what it is.
Yeah, it does.
And now we're all confused because we're trying to be good.
Well,
and then we got these images, right?
Totally. Yep.
Epinephrine's just flying around. Testosterone's like taking that and painting these pictures, and then we're trying to figure out what we're supposed to do in a relationship.
I know. It's so confusing, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote this book, just both of the books, to help give us some healthy perspectives. I think oftentimes females are taught, especially in the church, like to shut down their sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Sex can become dutiful sometimes for women. Like, you better give that to your husband if you want him to stay faithful, if you want him to be loyal. And it's really very demeaning messages to both men and women, right?
Because then it's transactional.
Oh, everything's transactional.
Yeah.
And here's something we know about, like, child development. Like, if a little boy asks a girl to play, if he says to her, "Do you want to play?" And she's like, "Yes." But if he says to her, "We're going to play house and you're going to be the mommy," well, then she has lost all of her freedom to choose.
Oh, wow.
And she no longer wants to play.
Yeah.
And so when we turn sex into a duty, then somebody's losing their freedom. And they've lost their ability to volunteer.
Wow.
And they've lost their ability to play. And that's when sex doesn't work.
And there's no joy.
No.
Yeah,
and
we've
so
lost the joy in it.
If we're in churches where the message is, wives,
submit to your husband.
And be dutiful about sex.
Because that's your job.
Then she has lost her choice.
Because then it becomes functional and transactional.
And it's not playful. And good sex happens in a playful atmosphere.
Right. I love, it was Kevin Lehman that wrote that book, Sex Starts in the Kitchen. Yeah. Which I've always thought was such a great title.
Called Sheet Music.
Yeah.
Right? Literally. And it's
Kevin,
sheets, like in a bed.
Knew Kevin for years. The best titles, of things. But it's true. There's, because we talk about foreplay, we talk about these things sexually, about how we're supposed to be as a man. And what we forget as men, that some of this foreplay, if you will, really is about security. It's about words that speak affirmation. Because guys need affirmation. Sometimes we forget that, respect, that whole thing. But it's words of affirmation. It's words of respect for your wife. It's some of foreplay. I tell this to men all the time. Some of it is hygiene.
For sure.
Like, dude, seriously. Really.
Take a shower.
Yeah, take a shower. At least wash your hands.
Brush your teeth.
Okay. So, and then The one that got me recently, and it was a conversation over dinner, and in which you talked about you were talking about something you had been teaching, or I can't remember. I don't think it's in this book, where women are not turned on by the sight of a man's body.
Right. This is just brain science. It's neuroscience.
And that just really screwed me up.
I'm sorry.
Ron and I both are like,
terribly
really?
Disappointing.
Seriously?
I know.
You mean walking around didn't do anything?
I know. Well,
It's like I would just
you know how men will
totally
get all
will
get all muscled up, like overly muscled up, thinking that that's a turn on to women.
Yeah.
It might be for a few, but for
it
a
might
lot,
be for a few.
it's a turn off.
Yeah.
Our brains are different, especially sexually.
Yeah.
And it's so helpful if we knew this.
Yeah.
So if a man sees his wife getting out of the shower naked, there's something that lights up in his brain.
Dude, yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, oh.
You need a hand drying
I want
off?
Sex, right? I
You
want
need a
sex,
hand
like, right
with
this minute.
anything? Yeah.
If he's naked getting out of the shower and she sees him, we don't have the light. The light does not come on. I hate to say that. I know it's disappointing.
And so Ron had the best line. He said, "You mean when I just kind of towel off with my foot up on the commode, that doesn't do anything?"
Right. I'm like, well, baby, maybe for you.
And so anyway, yeah, but no, I mean, because I remember Lindsay, my daughter, she goes, "What is this?" Because she has a son now.
Yeah.
Like her first was a little girl, Reese,
Yeah.
and then she has a boy, and then she's like, "What is this? Where guys just like walking around with their junk hanging out?
Right.
What is that?
Right.
What is that thing?"
Yeah. What is
I go,
that?
I don't know. It's just a boy thing.
Yeah.
Boys are like,
Totally.
it's out there.
Yeah.
And we celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, but we are different. Men and women are different.
Yeah, they
and for us to understand that. And so when we talk about foreplay, part of that is security, affirmation, right? What are some of the other things that you would tell guys? Hey, if you want to really release your wife into sexuality, some of it might be just the images we have, because so many of us have been into porn. We've seen things which we know. We had Joshua Broom on. You had him on your podcast.
Yeah,
the guy's unbelievable. He's
he's
just
great.
fantastic, and what he came through with his trauma and so forth. But he was in pornography, and he was an actor, and he talks about everybody's a victim. Everybody's a victim.
Everybody.
Yeah, the men, the women, everybody.
I think when little boys see porn, I think they are being victimized.
Yes, absolutely. So even the viewers are victims.
I think we have to very much change our perspective on even how we help people who have struggles with porn. And instead of a condemnation, I think it has to start with empathy. Like, hey, because most of the men I've worked with, and I used to work with a lot of men who struggle with porn addiction. And I'd always ask, well, how old were you when you got exposed? And the typical ages were 8 to 12. Always. I mean, I can almost say like always. I wish I couldn't. I wish they were older. I mean, if they got exposed at 20, they'd have more of a brain to know what to do with it.
Well, everything would not be as malleable.
No.
Yeah.
But when you think about being exposed
the
to
imprints.
Powerful adult sexuality when you are a child, that is being victimized by adult sexuality that should never be out there for children to be exposed to.
So for a man, coming back to this, helping a man be healthier in how he approaches sexuality with his wife. Okay.
Yeah.
Affirmation, kindness. Always, it's, to me, there's little things like, a lot of guys, we feel a victory if we load the dishwasher.
Yeah.
If you have one in your home, I don't know if everybody does, but it's the unloading that actually tips things over. Like you actually put things away.
And the funny thing is about
hygiene,
household chores, is sometimes we can relegate those all to the women, and it's like, well, but you live here too.
Yeah,
you dirty dishes just as much as I dirty dishes, and so Ron and I love how we've worked through all that, and we just treat like all the upkeep and chores of our home are like, okay, who's going to do what? Because it doesn't fall on me and then fall on you. It falls on us.
Yeah, it's us.
And then teaching our children that too, right?
And your children, your sons all had.
Yeah.
Here's
like,
the stuff.
Hey guys, we all live here.
We're all in here.
In.
We're all going to do this.
It's not mommy's job.
Okay, so now, how does it, so again, coming back to a male.
I think there is a couple of things, Paul. I think like what you just said, if he's replaying images and acting that out on his wife, that's going to be a big turnoff for her.
She's going to feel that. She's going to sense it. Like
the reason why is because he's not really being present. His mind is somewhere else.
Okay, there you go.
And so, true lovemaking requires two people bringing themselves to the bed. So it's eye to eye, person to person. But if one of the people is up in their head replaying images, then you're not truly able to bond. And God created sex so there would be a bonding between a husband and a wife and a man and a woman. It's meant to be a deep release of God's pharmacy, which includes dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin, and it's meant to cause us to bond to one another. And that becomes part of the glue of our marriages.
Oxytocin, such a remarkable
it's incredible
chemical.
Yes.
Because it actually, I call it the brotherhood chemical too, because it's the bonding of people in a deep friendship.
Deep.
It's and so somebody said something a number of years ago. I can't remember if it was a marriage thing that Judy and I went to or whatever. They talked about keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
And it was such a thing. I had never heard that before. And it's got to be 25 years ago. And as you practice that, this eye open thing, eye gate, this eye to eye thing as you're coming to a climax in your relationship, man, there's something that happens there that,
very much.
And so that is being present.
Totally.
Like you're totally present.
Totally present.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when a guy's like replaying these images, closing his eyes, she can sense that.
Totally. Well, he's not present with her.
He's not there.
So where are you?
She's doing this. Where are you? Wow.
When I was working through sexual trauma, Ron, and if Ron and I were making love, he could sense if I'd disappeared.
Okay.
Because I might get triggered. And he'd say, hey, babe, where are you? I'm like, oh my gosh. I've just gone into probably disassociation or I've been triggered.
Yeah.
And so he would be so sweet. I could say, hey, I'm triggered. And he would which means suddenly like, I'm not with my husband, I'm with somebody who's hurting me.
So triggered.
Yeah.
It's almost a Instagram phrase.
Yeah, it is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's real.
It's very real. It means something has happened and now you are in two places at one time. Yes, your body is here, but you are back in the past.
That's disassociation. And it is, it's the way I see it is I've reframed my present. I've gone to a different lens.
Well, yes, you have reframed in that sense. Not that you chose to.
Right.
It happens to you
like
automatically.
Boom. The lens changed.
Yeah.
It's like it's like those lenses on those old cameras where you could flip them.
Yeah.
And they would go to different colors.
Exactly.
Or to different, like ones, like they didn't used to be zoom lenses.
Right.
There used to be lenses that flipped.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's a different perspective.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
Boom.
exactly what happens.
Wow.
And so I could say to him, hey, I'm triggered. And he would just stop and hold me and pray for me.
Wow. God,
and then that was so
awesome.
Well, it was because it communicated to me like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I am with a man who will stop in the middle of having sex.
Yeah.
It means I am more important to him than him having an orgasm. He'll just stop. And he will care for me. And that in itself was super sexy for me, right? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm so safe with you. I'm so loved by you.
Yeah.
Like right now you will put this very traumatized part of me on the front burner and care for me more than you're caring for what's going on with your body.
Yeah.
And it was really, man, so like, I just trust Ron. You can see why.
Yeah. You know, Man, this is something that we as men, because 99% of the people listening or watching right now are men, with Brave Men, with our podcast.
Yeah.
And that's an eye opener right there. That's a freedom moment for a lot of us as men.
And nobody taught
Because I think
Ron,
I was an idiot the first decade.
Well, it's so sweet because nobody taught Ron how to do that.
Yeah.
That was just a total God.
Like a Holy Spirit thing just happened.
Total. Yeah. Ron, let me teach you how to heal your wife.
Wow.
Because I had so much trauma.
So strong.
And he doing that for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so safe in my own skin with this man. And
so good.
That was such a redemption for me.
Man.
But is it okay if I ask a question?
Please do.
With safety for women, if you want to kind of repeat this, would safety be kind of the most cherished thing for women?
Well, that's what I was saying, security.
Yeah. I think that both the husband and the wife need to feel safe if you're really going to have great sex.
Yeah.
And both need safety. Like if I'm critical of my husband and controlling, he's not going to feel safe with me.
Okay. And that is a great, because here's a little thing that has happened in my mind.
Yeah.
As a man, I have to know my safety. Part of my safety is you're not telling your girlfriend how screwed up I was having sex the other day.
No.
So my safety is you're not putting all this stuff out there.
No, there's got to be total safety. And sex is honestly, it's a very delicate area for a man.
Yeah.
It's a very tender area.
Yeah.
And sadly, men have been taught like you're supposed to prove yourself in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And it breaks my heart because performance ruins sex. And so if males have been taught, hey, especially through porn, sex is a performance, men, you better perform. And
it's not only through porn, it's through what other guys say.
What other guys say, implications, Viagra commercials.
Or for that matter, music that's coming out today.
Yeah.
In which, in particularly certain types of music, when they talk about their conquests, or talk about women in a demeaning way.
Absolutely.
And they talk about how many women they have sex with, or whatever the thing is, it does become a conquest performance thing.
Absolutely.
And really,
it's so
a lot of that is hiding trauma in their own heart.
Oh, for sure.
It's a cover up.
Well, like our friend Joshua became a porn star.
Right.
He had trauma.
Out of his own trauma.
He had trauma.
Wow.
He had unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
And so, whenever we go, shame does one of two things for us, Paul. It either causes us to go low, where I'm less than, I'm completely unworthy, you eat worms and dirt and then you die, or you go one up. And that's where you have the conquests. You're seeking to be, that's where you get a lot of the big ego. You get a lot of the grandiosity, but it's still shame. All of this is shame. You go high, you go low, it's all shame.
We talk a lot about, at Christian Men's Network, we'll talk a lot about the stronger a man is on the inside, the more gracious, loving, kind he could be on the outside. Yeah. And with Jesus Christ, humility was often misidentified as passivity, when in fact it wasn't, because the humility of Christ, not preferring himself, came to be a servant, was also that part of him that loved so much that he went into a church and just beat a bunch of guys up, which happened more than a couple times. And he did that out of love for those who are being hurt, mistreated. Right? Yeah.
Well, because those who've gone high with shame need a hand down. Those who've gone low with shame need a hand up.
So it's the weaker a man is on the inside, the less formed he is, if you will, the more he has to prove himself on the outside. Yeah. So he proves himself, conquests, proves himself with sports, athletics, business, something he does with his hands. So he's trying to prove himself on the outside in order to cover up what he has, if you will, this deficiency. What is it?
The deep insecurities.
The insecurity?
The deep feeling of toxic shame, And so I love to do the work of what I call the adaptive child, where I help people. I did that this weekend. I did a marriage conference, and just Ron and I did kind of a role play.
Yeah.
Where, because kind of one of our areas where we can bump in our marriage.
Yeah.
You know, we all have our bumpy places.
Yeah, Judy and I have a bunch of them.
We all do.
Yeah.
And so one consistent theme is money.
Yeah.
And Ron grew up with a complete lack of it. I grew up with my dad's attitude was, I'll spend, I'll just make more.
Yeah.
Right. So very different
Right.
economic circumstances. So Ron can get very anxious about money. And then he wants to get anxious with me about money. And like, well, you just need to tighten your belt. And I'm like, well, honey, you know, is that really what needs to happen?
Why don't you just go put it in another kitchen?
So the other day when we were just having coffee and like, we'll pray together and read our Bible together in the morning. And I'm like, hey, sweetheart, what does that little boy inside of you need? He gets really nervous about money. He gets really scared.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, here's an empty chair. I pulled it up in front of him. And I just said, hey, why don't you talk to that little boy? He needs some reassurance. And so Ron he was so sweet. He just said, I said, just really talk to him like he's right there in the chair. And he said, hey, little guy, I'm sorry there wasn't enough money for you growing up. I'm sorry, like you felt like you had to feel like you felt like you had to figure out money on your own.
Wow.
And so like as early as you could, you got a paper route. You worked really hard. You saved every dime. It felt scary and out of control. And I just want to tell you now that the wise Ron, the adult Ron, has your back. And Nancy does too. And God's got us both. And so you can relax. And you don't have to worry about money anymore. And there were tears. We both had really tender tears. And I am telling you, that was probably about 2 months ago. We have not had one single bump about money since then. So I think a lot of times, Paul, what needs to happen is, you know, the Bible is so brilliant. And it says, love others as you love yourself. Well, a lot of times there's this adaptive child inside of us that is carrying around all this toxic shame that says you're either less than or you better prove that you're better than. And if we can learn how to take that little adaptive child onto our lap and say, hey, sweetheart, hey, buddy, I'm so sad that you got exposed to porn and that you were taught that this is what real men do, that they conquer females, that they perform sexually, and that's what makes you a man. But I'm so sorry you saw that. I'm so sorry. And now, as a wise adult, I'm here to tell you that that's not what makes a man. You don't have to perform.
So how do we deal with, because shame seems to be, let me just put that a different way. Shame is a major issue in our culture.
Oh, it's universal.
Yeah. No, around the world. Every place I go.
Yep.
And I think, for me, I mean, in one sense, you're the therapist, the expert. But I talk to a lot of people, and shame seems to stop men from being able to embrace. I've got a friend who's he's a great pastor. He's a great guy. And he's got 2 teenage sons, and he's never hugged them. And I look at that and I go, okay, somewhere, because he's a great guy. And and I know that he loves them deeply and dearly. And I think that's a product of that stuff, something.
I think so too.
Okay, so how do we deal with that? I mean, because rather than just go, okay, I'm going to push it down, like the fake forgiveness thing. How do we deal with shame?
I really do think it is learning how to work with your adaptive child. And
what does an adaptive child mean? What's that mean?
It's that part of you that adapted to the environment you grew up in.
Okay.
So this adaptive child was...
like a coping thing, like we coped with
you
it.
Adapted.
And so we became that.
It was brilliant.
Okay.
Like for me, I adapted to becoming a people pleaser because you sure as heck don't want to tick Dad off.
No, right.
So be as pleasing as possible, and be nurturing and take care of people.
Yeah.
And so that was my adaptive child. The thing is, it's brilliant and strategic in childhood, and then it becomes maladaptive in adulthood. Right?
Yeah.
So we've got to go back and say to that part of ourselves, like, hey, sweetheart, like I'll do this with myself. When I find myself going into people pleasing, to this day.
Really?
Right? And I'll just pause and go, hey, honey, people pleasing was how you kept yourself alive. Thank you. It was brilliant.
Thanks for staying alive.
Right.
But we're done with that.
No, really. Like it
Really?
it was brilliant and strategic, and thank you for keeping me alive. And now you don't have to work that hard.
We have a motivational email that comes out 3 times a week called Brave Men Motivational. I wrote one the other day. It comes out this week. That is real short. And it basically has to do with whenever you get overheated, when you ever get to this little place, and you're going to make a wrong decision, you just need to stop for a minute. And because you have to essentially make a decision against yourself. And the way you make a decision against yourself is the way I do it, is I just say to myself, you know what? Right now, somebody has to be the adult in this conversation. And I'm going to choose to be the adult.
Yeah.
Somebody has to choose to be the adult right now, and dang it has to be me.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's good. I might even advocate for even you to say that maybe a little kinder.
Okay. All right. So in other words, I shouldn't be the frickin' adult with that? Yeah.
Right.
You idiot.
Right.
Yeah. No, we do talk a lot about that, how speech can actually profile ourselves.
Right, it does.
And I play golf with guys or do other sports, and a guy will miss a shot. Yeah. It's like, dude, you made 5 out of 10. That would make you one of the best. And yet you say to yourself, you idiot. And it's like, no, don't speak death over yourself. Speak life.
They say, like, psychologically, I don't know exactly what the number is, but I think people say about 5,000 cruel things to themselves a day. It's astronomical.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really?
And it's just like this ticker tape.
Yeah, because self-talk, we talk about that a lot. Self-talk's about 500 words a minute, something like that.
Oh, so you think about your day? How
many?
Like
that.
Yeah.
See, what I know is, because you're a public speaker and you get up and speak, and so I'm a public speaker, and I'll get up at men's events or whatever, and I know if I'm speaking, let's say 160 words a minute, that some guy's sitting out there listening to me, but he's got another 300 words that are screaming along about he's got to go fix something, he's got to stop, get his oil changed, this, and I'm trusting the Holy Spirit to pierce into this thing, and it's part of the art of public speaking, if you will, so that you can, and it's something we talked about in lovemaking, but it's also part of being the adult in a conversation, which is becoming present. Getting present, like, let's come to reality right now. So let's get back. So let's do this shame thing. So so what is shame?
Shame is belief that it's just this deep feelings of I'm not enough. I'm bad. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
I am inherently inadequate, insecure, bad, maybe even evil.
Yeah.
Insufficient.
That's just who I am.
Unlovable.
So guilt, this is in a book we're writing called Gideon's Descent. And speaking of Peter and Jesus, when Jesus released Peter from the, chapter 21 of John, and basically releases him of not only his guilt, but his shame. And guilt is believing and knowing you made a mistake. But shame is believing you are the mistake.
Well, have you noticed how the apostle might call himself, like, have names for himself, but he doesn't say, hi, I'm Peter the betrayer.
Right.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
Because I was with somebody this weekend. We were speaking at a conference, and one of the speakers says, he had an infidelity decades ago. And he still calls it my sin. My infidelity,
still owns
and I'm
it.
like, buddy, you're still lost in toxic shame over that.
Wow.
That's toxic shame. I've got to call him and go, hey.
So he's defining himself based on that.
He still is.
So he's keeping that definition as part of who he is.
It's become his narrative.
Whereas when we become a follower of Christ, the Bible says, he says, when we become a follower of Christ, Paul said this, he said, we become a new creation.
Yeah, we do.
Old things have passed away. All things become new. In other words, we're redefined.
Yeah.
The process is, we are immediately, if you become a follower of Christ, when you do, you are immediately grafted in as part of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
That whole God as your Father comes alive, right?
It's so
But there's a
hard.
process of conversion.
There is, isn't there?
Our speech still needs to change. We still have some of these same things. And so now the process, and I look at it this way, we as men in particular, we have a tendency to feel like pain is something wrong happening to us. Mm-hmm. And so when the sculptor comes in and tries to chisel something, we push back on the hand of the sculptor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We want to run away from pain.
Because we don't want the pain.
Can be the greatest.
Pain is a teacher.
Yeah, pain is such a beautiful teacher, Paul.
Right?
Like that day of excruciating pain I was in, that's the last thing I wanted to feel.
That whole day of crying.
Yeah. It's because pain was coming up, and I'm like, oh, I can't feel pain. No, thank you.
And where did that thing tip where it was like, I'm going to help people come out of this?
Not for a long time. Like I had a lot of work, agonizing work I had to do first. You know, that grave work is agonizing. That's why Jesus agonized so hard in the garden and wanted his friends there with him, because it was a moment of complete loneliness and even isolation.
Wow.
Right? Like, my God, where?
Yeah.
Right? Like he was even feeling that separation from his Father.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about allowing myself to grieve so profoundly, Paul, is then after I got out my sadness, because I was better at that, got out my sadness, and then I had to get out my anger and my own rage. And then I could say, okay, God, I think I'm ready to forgive. Now what? And God says, well, Nancy, now you would have to stop being your father's judge, jury, and executioner. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He says, well, do you judge him for all the things he did? And I said, well, yeah, they were really bad. And God said, well, Nancy, are you capable of doing everything your dad did? I'm like, no, I'd never do those things to my children. And I just felt like God said to me, but wait, are you capable of every sin under the sun? Yeah. And I was just humbled.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes,
yeah, we are
I
human.
am.
Yeah.
We are all capable of every darkness.
Yeah.
And so God just said to me, okay, well, if you're done being the judge, jury, and executioner, now you can forgive him. And I'm like, you're right. And then it was just like, it was done.
You know, for me, that also gives me the empathy. Is that the right word? Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting in doing this, for you and I to have this conversation, is I'm really parsing my words. I'm really trying to be careful because you're the expert at this stuff. But empathy would be, I think, the right word. I have a great empathy for people caught in the dark side. Me too. Who, as an example, a terrorist who went through such great trauma as a young person and went through great darkness. They have great anger and rage in them, and so they pick up a weapon and shoot people, or they build an IED and blow up people. And I'm a man of law. I believe in sovereignty and so forth, but I just have a great empathy for the fact that there's not one man on the face of the earth beyond the reach of grace.
Isn't the truth?
I mean, Pharaoh, but even Putin, if he's still alive when you hear this thing, I don't know. I'm just saying that I believe we can pray for somebody to come across every single man's path who knows Jesus. And somehow that word set that person free. Yeah. It's just that we've seen it. We've seen some of the worst people. Yeah. And so here's this man who came out with this complex. Was it complex? I didn't write it. I wrote down some other stuff. But
complex trauma?
It's not PTSD. It's complex trauma. Okay. Yeah. So he comes out of the war with this complex trauma. Yeah. And here's this man who became a follower of Christ, right? like all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
It was so negative.
Yeah.
And yet that guy who looked all good on the outside, but was decayed on the inside, becomes a follower of Christ. And so that same thing that happened to each one of us who are followers of Christ made a new person.
Yeah.
Right? So then God
was,
speaks to you and says, he's not the same person.
Well, I mean, my dad's transformation process was a long process.
Right. We're all in process.
He was 50 years old, around 50 when he received Christ. Yeah. And he received Christ for sure, and it was radical.
Yeah.
But he was still an awful father for a long time. And he was still a boundary violator. And he still could be mean and hateful and evil. And it just took, we all like the magic wand.
Yeah. Well, God's not a magician. He works miracles.
And that's why Scripture says, we work out our salvation.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of like, I think our souls get saved, but there's a whole lot of other saving that needs to be happening as we walk this out. Right?
Yeah.
And so, I was able to forgive my dad, but still letting him back in had to be a slow process because he still wasn't a very safe man, even though he's a believer.
Yeah.
Not all believers are safe people.
So how did you end up? So now back in the conversation you had with God, and He says to you, "You've forgiven him, but you're still judging him."
Well, no, that's how genuine forgiveness happens.
That's where genuine forgiveness
That's
happened.
when genuine forgiveness
The previous
happens.
was fake forgiveness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I didn't want to grieve. I didn't want to face the
forgiveness.
pain. I didn't want to do any of the hard work.
Yeah. Okay.
I think forgiveness requires a lot of hard work, just like it did for Jesus. He went and grieved deeply, and then he, could say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Could we? And then, of course, my God, why have you forsaken me?
He felt the aloneness, the forsakenness.
Yeah,
right?
But he started a song, Psalm 22, which ends up being triumphant.
Yeah, it does.
So, can we forgive people and speak words that help then begin to shift our heart?
I think we can because, I just really, in that season, I would think deeply about what's loosed on heaven will be loosed in earth and vice versa. And I just thought, well, as I release all of these feelings and then I can genuinely love him, doesn't mean I open up the floodgates and just let him back in.
Right.
But I really saw after that process, my dad started entering into his own transformation process and started becoming healthier. And then he and I could have some really sweet conversations.
Wow.
And I'll never forget the day, Paul, I was diagnosed with lupus in 2005. And I had shingles all over. I had no immune system. My doctor thought I was probably going to die because I had lupus.
No, you went through a deadly situation.
And so one of the big things that happened during that season for me is I'm like, Lord, what is this? And I felt like the Lord just said, Nancy, this is about rejection. It's intergenerational rejection. And call and ask your dad about it. So I called Dad and I said, Dad, do you think I have a lot of rejection? He goes, oh my gosh, Nancy. It's like my mother had so much rejection. And he goes, well, I'm going to pray a prayer over you. So he prayed a prayer over me. And within a week, the shingles were gone. Wow. And then my body could actually start healing. It was still about a 2-year process. And so my dad was a part of that. And my dad felt tremendous guilt. He had told my son, your mother is so sick because I was such a horrible father to her. And so he felt a lot of guilt and shame. And then another thing that happened between the two of us was, I'm like, oh my gosh, my dad needs to forgive himself. So I called him and I said, hey, Dad, I've completely forgiven you. And I even have all this love for you. And I feel like you and I are establishing a healthy relationship. And you're 80, dude, I don't know how long you're going to live. So I think as long as you haven't forgiven you, we're really only going to be able to talk about the grandkids, the weather, and your garden.
Wow.
And I would like something more than that. I'd like to talk about real things. But until you forgive yourself, I don't think we'll be able to because guilt and shame are walls to intimacy.
Wow.
And so I said, Dad, would you forgive yourself? And he goes, oh, God. Oh, no. God, I can't. Just fumbling, mumbling. And he's like, he finally just said, no, I just can't. I was horrible. And I'm like, yeah, you were. You were a really horrible father. And I want you to forgive yourself because God has provided a way for me to forgive you.
Wow.
And I actually want a dad before you die.
Wow.
And I'm like, and I want you to get your wife on the phone. It wasn't my mother. She had died when I was young. And so he got his wife, Bonnie, on the phone. And I'm like, Bonnie, I want you to hear this because I think he's going to need your help. And so I said, Dad. So we stayed on the phone for 2 hours, wrestling with his own shame and guilt and unforgiveness towards himself. And finally, he's like, oh, okay, fine. I will forgive myself. And he did. And after that, for 3 years, I had the most amazing dad.
Wow. This is, it's hard for us as men to be vulnerable.
Isn't it?
'Cause we're taught not to be.
We are. You are. I mean, from the time boys are little, the vulnerability is virtually sucked out of them like a vacuum cleaner. And the sweetest thing I want from my husband is his sweet vulnerability. That is the sexiest thing he can give me. That is the most tender thing. When he trusts me with his vulnerable heart, I just melt.
Yeah.
That's when I fall the deepest in love with him.
Yeah.
And I realized I have to make it safe for him to do that.
Yeah.
Because if he can't risk his vulnerability with me. Like the other day, he said to me, I'd had a really busy week, and my husband has some deep feelings of abandonment from his own mother. And so he lashed out at me. He said, you never listen to me. And my first instinct was to lash back and say, oh my gosh, that's all I do. Right?
Yeah.
But I paused.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's go to your adult brain, Nancy, right? Let's
be the adult.
And so I just paused. I finished blowing my hair dry. And I said to him, hey, I can't hear you. Give me a minute. But I had heard him. But I wanted to just be with it for a second.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, babe, what is it that you need? What are you needing? What are you needing from me?
Wow.
And he just paused. And he said, well, I can get to feeling kind of abandoned when you're busy. And so I could just go over and put my hands on his face and look him in the eyes and say, honey, you're the most important human in this whole world to me.
Yeah.
And I love you more than anything. And you are precious to me. And I love it when you tell me that you are missing me. Yeah. It works so much better than lashing out at me.
Yeah.
So, I love to teach couples like, hey, turn your complaints into requests. What is it that you need? Like, instead of like, you never want to have sex. It'd be so vulnerable for men to say, I miss being close to you. I miss the closeness of your body.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so warm and connected to you when we are together physically. It means more to me than you will ever know.
Yeah.
A woman can melt to that.
Yeah.
But when it's like, it's your duty to give me sex, or you never want sex,
it's
right?
Those words you're talking about right now. It's hard for us to, as men, sometimes to come up with those words.
It is, isn't it?
And perhaps that's where we do need to read things that help us with that, right?
Well, it's like learning a foreign language, Paul.
Yeah.
Because by the time you were 6 years old, you had already learned the message as a male. Don't be a moron and be super vulnerable.
Yeah.
You armor up, buddy.
Yeah.
Or you're stupid.
Yeah.
And so men have this very awkward relationship with vulnerability and with the language of vulnerability.
Yeah. I think part of the, if you will, the progress of where we are in the church is that there is some of this teaching in your book on trauma, love, and sex, and God Made a Woman, and your podcast and the things you're doing. And others, that speak to this.
Yeah.
I think our setting some men free, and I think it's helping a lot,
too.
frankly.
Yeah.
A guy, we were working out in the gym, and we were on a trip, and we were in England, working out in the gym, and this guy's buff, and he's showing me some different moves with the weights, and I'm like, okay. And of course, I'm using the lesser weight, but anyway. And then, so the next day, we were in a class together. We were working on our doctorate together, and the next day, we're in this thing, and we're talking about some things. We're at C.S. Lewis's house in England. Mm. And he said, and I forget what we were sharing. I forget what it was, but he said, came up with what have people been writing? What have you been writing lately? Because we're in C.S. Lewis's house with Leonard Sweet. Mm-hmm. And I think Lynn said something about, what have you been writing the last couple of days? What's come up the last couple of days in your mind, notes, whatever. And this guy, I've been working out with, strong guy, very well-known pastor, says, let me read you a poem I wrote last night to my wife.
Oh, how sweet.
And he had sent her a poem that morning. Of course, all the rest of us guys were like, dude, come on, man, don't do that. But it was awesome. And he read this poem. Yeah. And then Bryce, who's here, who's our producer, we're working with a man the other day on a podcast that we were doing and getting ready to do a broadcast. And I think it was right after we had done it. The guy sent you a poem that day before we get on the podcast together. And this guy is like a big time business guy.
Oh, I love it.
And strong, and I do think there's that place where we're beginning to learn to speak.
I do too, Paul.
More vulnerable,
hopeful, isn't it?
Language. And I do think we're in a place in the church where, because of you, and we're talking with Nancy Houston, as in the city, Nancy Houston, you can find her online. Because of you speaking into people's lives, because of you doing a podcast that is vulnerable, because of you talking and Ron allowing you in that sense to speak about some of these things, Judy and I have just over time, and we've been married a long time. We've been married 52 years, but we're continuing to learn things. We're continuing to learn how to say things to each other in a way that brings life, more and more life into our marriage. It's really been interesting, even like texting each other. Like I'll be taking off. I travel a lot with the ministry, and I'll text her as the plane's taking off. I already miss you. Yeah. Well, I don't know I guess I've said that before, but it has become more prominent lately. I don't know. Maybe you go through stages.
Well, and
romance.
Don't you think? Yes, I think the older we get, the more precious our marriages can become.
Yeah, there's no question.
Very tender. And I think as we age too, we just stop caring about some of the dumb things that we used to care about.
I don't know. I still care about a lot of stupid things. I mean, just the furniture right now that's behind me on this, on us videotaping, if you're watching it by video, will be different the next time you see this video, because she put some new shelves in. I was in doing an event out in the West Coast, and she put some new shelves in, and I don't like them. And so it was like, yours, why do I care? But I walked in and I cared. You care. Yeah. Okay. It was like, and then later I go, well, that was kind of dumb. I really cared about it. And I texted her, I go, I hate these. I don't know, maybe that was a strong word, but I do. Yeah. Anyway, and we're getting some different shelves. So she and I, in a very civil manner now, over the last couple of days, looked online at some different shelves. Now, what a stupid thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I walked in the other day. I'd just come off a flight and a lot of travel and stuff. And I walked in and I'm like, I hate these. And then I'm like, I don't even know if we see them in the shot. You know what I mean? Well, I don't even know if we see them in the shot.
And don't you think that's a typical response when we are tired, when we've just gotten off a long
flight?
There's
that. So, okay, I give myself some grace.
There you go.
But the fact is, later I thought, because I yelled, I hate these.
Oh, yeah.
And then later I thought, God, like a 5-year-old, at least I didn't throw anything.
That's good. But isn't it good when we can go, oh, there is that part of me.
I did. I did give it some space after I texted her, I hate these. And then she gave me some space, like, oh, yeah, buddy. She didn't text that back. Right. She gave it some space. I gave it some space. She goes, what do you hate? I go, well, I don't like they're wimpy, they're glass, whatever. And then Bryce walks in today and goes, "Oh, I don't think it'll look so bad." I'm like, "Go, dude. This is anyway.
My space.
My space.
It's my cave.
Yeah, it's my cave. It is my cave.
Right.
So
I know.
And
I want to fix up Ron's cave too, but I've learned not to. It's his cave. Leave it alone.
Okay. So, but I do think, and it is part of learning, right? And learning each other's rhythms and
isn't it Matthew 19 that says that marriage requires maturity? And, none of us when we get married have it. We've got to grow up into it.
I just wanted legal sex.
Right, exactly. And it's so mature, isn't it? When we look back and go, well, that was mature. But, we marry at the stage we're at, and then we have to grow up into it. Yeah. And it's continual. I hope that you guys never stop. I hope we never stop.
No, right.
Because a marriage dies. Yeah. People die when they aren't working on adult development.
Wow.
Adult development is one of my favorite topics. And I think it should be every adult's favorite topic.
It should be.
Not that I need to be right, but it's just like 2 Harvard professors have given their whole career to studying adult development.
Wow.
And what they have found is, we can have these attitudes that, well, I'm 21, I'm fully grown now. And it's like, or I'm 25, so I finally have my prefrontal cortex. And it's like, but that's the beginning of adulthood. Mm-hmm. We haven't arrived anywhere.
Yeah.
And we're meant to go from the socialized mind where we learn how to get along with others. And then we're meant to move into self-transformation where it's like, wait a minute, how am I going to own my life?
Yeah.
How am I going to own all of my own behaviors, my own attitudes, my own emotions, and then what am I going to do with that?
This is why I get so fired up about what we do with Christian Men's Network is because I want there to be an adventure in our lives.
Yes.
And there's an old phrase, I don't remember, it's been ascribed to a number of different people, but it's essentially this, that most men die at 50. We just don't bury them till they're 70.
Isn't that true? I think people, we could say people, right?
Yeah, people.
Ooh, a lot of death.
I remember talking, people, men and women, and I remember my friend Dave, and Dave went to our 50th or 55th, I don't know, high school reunion. And I go, how was it? He goes, dude, it was terrible. He said, he's talked about this guy, Jim, who actually just passed away, but talk about Jim. He goes, Jim showed up. He's been living in Hawaii, working out, doing stuff. Man, the guy was great. It's great to be with Clint, doing fantastic, going out fishing, doing all this stuff. He says, but there were a bunch of old guys there.
Yeah.
And so what do you mean? He said, a lot of old people. And I said, well, when we talked about, he said a lot of the girls didn't show up because they didn't want to show up looking old, like old grandmas. Because they've just, and I don't, it's not the looks in one sense. What he was talking about was the attitude of,
totally.
I stopped.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you stay married
I don't either.
Without growing and doing stuff.
I think that's why there's so much emotional,
vibrant.
So much emotional and physical divorces. They're not divorced, but they're divorced.
You know what? That is the biggest, the largest percentage-wise of divorce. And you can correct me. You study all these things, but my last reading on this was somewhere between the ages for men between 54 and 64, 50 to 64, right in there, was the highest percentage of men getting divorced right now. Yeah. And because they just kind of like, and I call it the Viagra syndrome. And my friend Dwayne Pickett, he said, it's just because that guy still thinks he's a player. And it's all chemically induced, if you will. Right. And so he's doing all this stuff. Yeah. And then because we haven't aged, together, if you will. Right.
Stayed alive together.
Do stuff. Be vibrant. Have fun,
Yeah. That's what I love about you and Judy. You guys are a few years ahead of us. It's going to be our 50th this summer. And
is it really?
Yeah. It's going to be our 50th.
I didn't know you guys were that old.
Yeah, we are. And so...
or Ron is.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
But we look at you guys and we're like, oh, we love them. They're still... reinventing themselves, doing new things, building new projects. And I'm like,
always a project.
Isn't that awesome? But I love that.
It's fantastic.
You haven't packed it all up and just like, I'm going to get my recliner until I die.
No, I think of John Maxwell was talking about his dad, having lunch with his dad one day. And his dad was, I think, 94 at the time. And John's like, Dad, you should begin with some of your friends. He goes, dude, my friends are all gone.
Yeah, I know.
But then he pulls out this piece of paper, and John goes, what's that? And his dad goes, these are all the projects I have for this year.
Aww.
And I thought, how cool is
Isn't that great?
And John was sharing that because I know he's done that in his own life. And now he's got another new project because he just, changed some of the ones he was doing. But that's, for me, that's the vibrancy of life, and Judy and I have talked about this. And it's not just travel, because things do change and you can't travel as much or whatever. No. Yeah. So I would advise, if you're a younger couple and you're in your 30s or 40s and you've always wanted to go to Italy, don't wait till you're 68 or 70 because you won't be able to walk up some of those stairs.
That's right.
Or it's not going to feel as good. Now, you guys will be able to do that because you guys work out all the time and you got, you do all this stuff. Yeah. But the fact is that, so when you're 35, go take one of those trips, do one of those things, have a blast, make a memory. Your folks did that when they went to Europe for a month. Mm-hmm. Just do that deal and make that thing happen. Judy and I, we're always meeting people. And so we were sitting I don't know, it was a pizza place the other day. Yeah. And it's kind of like where you sit together sort of thing. So we started talking with the couple next to us. And started finding out a little bit about them. They're a younger couple and have kind of a blended marriage and all this sort of stuff. And it was really fascinating. A couple of things, they started talking about this. They had decided to do a couple things that most people would have waited till later. And they went ahead and did them. And I just told them, I said, well done, man. Well done. Yeah. He's got an older daughter and then 2 younger ones by the second marriage. Yeah. And, because it's going to keep them alive and vibrant and healthy. Totally. And there's some of these things we need to do. And then doing this work of grief. Yeah. We have to do these things.
You know why I think a lot of people give up, Paul? Is because they're carrying around so much sadness and grief and it's heavy. Even a lot of our Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that, they're now finding, for some of it, not all of it, but for some of it, it's just repressed depression. Wow. People haven't dealt with their depression. And they've carried around their whole lives. And it's like lugging around 1,000 pounds. So you feel tired, you feel exhausted, you lose your vibrancy, you lose your energy.
So your life closes in.
Absolutely.
It's smaller.
We have to remember that our emotions are like 2 sides of the same coin. And what
does that mean?
Well, it means that there's joy and happiness on one side, and on the other side are some of your sadder, heavier emotions. And if you aren't dealing with both of those, you'll lose both because they're attached to each other.
Wow.
So if you want joy and energy and vitality, you've got to be dealing with your sadness, your anger, your rage, your depression, your anxiety. And, my big concern for men is the amount of a low-grade depression that they carry around with them, but they have no vocabulary or permission to talk about it. So they just drink a little too much, or they work a little too much, or they play too hard, or they make too much. They think the next conquest or more money.
They're dealing with the pain.
And they're dealing with unresolved depression. And so it breaks my heart because we haven't helped men have a vocabulary for their emotions.
I think most of us as men, we deal with disappointment at such a level. Yeah. And disappointment is not based on where you are, but where you expected to be. Yeah. And that gap between where you are and where you expected to be is the level of disappointment most men live with. Well, and you can take men who have put companies on Dow Jones. They've won huge stock offerings. They've made $100 million, and they're still living with this gap.
Totally. Money doesn't buy happiness.
No, I remember Clint. I just lost Clint Gresham, and Clint was in the ice bath after they won the Super Bowl, and he was played on the Seahawks, and he's in the ice bath, and there's a guy next to him, a whirlpool. There's a guy next to him. It's a month after the Super Bowl. They've won the Super Bowl, the world champions. And the guy looked at him and he said, man, I thought it would feel different.
Yeah, that's right.
And what he was really saying was, I thought it would define me.
That's right.
I thought I would find my identity.
That's right.
And it hasn't done that for me.
No, and it won't. And men can give their whole lives to seeking things at will. So can women. But end of the day, it doesn't. And then we get older and it's like it starts coming out one way or another. And like a lot of people who've used alcohol to cover will suddenly in their 60s become allergic to alcohol. They can't tolerate it anymore, or they can't make the same amount of money, or they can't keep conquering females or whatever it is, right? And I'm like, gosh, you guys, you've got to have permission to stop and get the help you deserve for any unresolved depression, for any unresolved trauma, for any, like for the father who can't hug his sons.
Yeah.
He's a really good man, but there's something
He's a good
there.
guy.
There's something there. And for the men I've worked with, not every man, so I never want to say something that this is the way it always is, because it never is the way it always is. And we love to reduce humanity to its simplest terms.
Oh, we want formulas.
Yeah. So this is not a formula. But I just know a lot of men I've worked with who struggle with same-sex porn. Mm-hmm. I will ask them, hey, did like your daddy roughhouse with you? Did he kind of manhandle you? Was he there to wrestle when he came in from work with you? And consistently they say no. And I'm like, do you suppose you've sexualized some need that you might have?
Yeah.
Do you suppose you just have a need for masculinity?
Yeah.
I mean, the studies are astronomical that children who have daddies who wrestle with them when they're little walk down high school hallways with more confidence.
There's no question.
It's crazy. You daddies have no idea how much you're needed. I remember a few months ago, maybe it was a couple of years ago, I was in an Uber in New York with an Uber driver. He's taking me to the airport, young man, young black man. And he's a baby daddy. He's not married, And he's kind of debating what to do. And I said, hey, buddy, has anybody ever told you how you are going to impact your little girl? And your presence will change her life? That when children have a daddy in the home, they can sleep more soundly at night because daddy's home. And just that masculine presence. The story of the Beauty and the Beast is true. It's not just a fun fairy tale. Females want a trainable beast. And what I mean by that is, I think that's why Taylor Swift is with Travis, right?
Yeah.
Because, she lives in a very unsafe world, no matter how much security she puts
Very much
around
so.
her.
Yeah.
But if she has a man who honestly can roar like a beast and looks like a beast, she's safe. But now he's got to be a trainable beast. He's got to be able to be kind and vulnerable and tender and loving and soft with her.
I've always said that the bad guys always get the best looking girls.
Well, a woman, she wants to know that he's going to be able to protect
because
her.
of security.
Right.
And she will do whatever it takes to get security for her children.
Absolutely. Well, females know that we are at least, we're 50%. We don't have the upper body strength that a man does.
Yeah.
And so, we know that when we give birth, that not only are we as females vulnerable, but our babies are vulnerable. And so when you have a man around you who's going to keep you, who when necessary, he will rise to the occasion and say, oh, no, you won't.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, no, you won't.
Yeah.
And even will sometimes know when to push against her. Because she really doesn't want the 7 dwarfs as her, she wasn't attracted to them, right? Because, right? A woman wants to know, like Ron will push against me.
Yeah.
He'll say, no, Nancy, you're being difficult. And I'm like, he's right.
Yeah.
Or I'm being a little bratty right now. And so he knows when to push for me and with me and when to push against me. And I him. And I call that an empowered relationship. And I'm telling you, if you want passion in your marriage, then you need to have an empowered relationship.
I want to do a podcast sometime for Dad Academy, and when we talk about fatherhood.
Yeah.
Talk about fathering, because Warren Farrell in his book, talk about the boy crisis.
The boy
Warren
crisis.
Farrell's.
Yeah.
He talked about one of the most important things you can do with your sons is wrestle.
Yeah.
Because it teaches them boundaries. Like, no, you can't kick Dad there.
No,
I can't do that.
No.
Can't wrestle with your sister like
No.
that. They learn boundaries, intimacy. There's all sorts of things.
That's one thing my dad did great with me.
Yeah.
My daddy would wrestle with me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that blessed me.
And I'm sure Ron did that with your boy.
Oh, like 4 sons nonstop. nonstop. Sometimes I'm like, hey guys, can we just not wrestle for
I
three minutes?
With my sons, Judy would yell upstairs. She'd go, "Stop! Somebody's going to get hurt."
Oh yeah.
I'd be like, "Well, that's the point."
Oh yeah. Oh wait. Oh wait. Oh.
Well,
always.
there was that.
Always.
There was that.
I got in trouble.
Always. I'm trying to get them calm, bedtime routines,
Yeah.
and then Ron
and
come
I
in
would
and
start
wrestle
wrestling
them.
right as we start
I'm like,
to go
okay,
to bed.
buddy, you
Yeah,
wrestled
go
with
to
them, you
sleep.
get to put them to bed.
Talking with Nancy Houston,
Yeah.
it's been great having you on
So
Brave
good.
Men. We could talk forever.
We could.
You're just a fascinating person.
Oh, well, thank you. Sorry.
And you've given your life, you and Ron, really to help people heal.
Yeah.
And that comes out. And so thank you for walking it out. You know, that thing from that Saturday where you cried all day.
Yeah.
And then walking forward and walking through the grief, doing the work, as you say it, because that work was day by day. We look back and it was like this, okay, we did that.
Yeah.
But it was day by day.
I still do some of it. I continue to.
Well, yeah, we all have to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I love the way you guys talk about it. Josh Spurlock and others. Hey, so you're doing some work? So it's like a thing.
Yeah.
It's like a normal, like
That's right.
normative.
That's right.
Yeah, of course we do some work.
Yeah.
And but thank you for doing that, Nancy, for you and Ron, and thank you for the Lord bringing you guys together. And I don't think that I knew all the way before that you guys came to Christ. So that's really fascinating. This has been a great conversation. I want to do more of these to help people. And I think for some of us as men, as we listen to all these things, it helps. You know, my whole goal is to just click the dial one click to help a guy. You know, it's 8. You know, the Ingram scale. You know, how many times we're touched before we come to Christ. I think that's true after all. So I think there's these little clicks on a dial, and I look at it that way. Can I just help somebody click, just one click towards that place that helps them become more fully them? You know, and so thank you for going through what you've done in order to help us just do one click. Because Judy and I, in our relationship, has been so enlarged and blessed by being friends of you and Ron. You know, because it's every so often it'll be a little something, a little click. You know, the little 22-minute thing.
Yeah.
You know, that we didn't even talk about that, but that I guess it's become a thing now for us. So, and then you know, the getting out of the shower thing. That was a moment for me, a discovery moment. You know, a few years ago when but just all those things. And thank you for writing the books and the stuff you are writing, the podcast, the new website, the stuff you're working on with your sons. That's really cool. And just all the things that are going on. We pray for you that, you know, what your hands touch will prosper. Every place you put your feet will be holy ground. And the Lord continues to give you favor and success in all that you do. Thanks for being on Brave Men today. It's been awesome.
Paul, thank you, my dear friend.
Yeah.
You
Very cool.
and Judy bless us. We love you guys and your family.
Yeah. Awesome.